Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to my autobiography, The Perils of an Interesting Life. This is Chapter 3. One thing you should know about this series of videos telling my life story is they're kind of meant to be viewed in companionship with other videos on my channel. Specifically, story time with Uncle Sage, and any of the videos that I put in that folder, because those are true stories from my life. And I did another one today that I just posted up, talking about how my uncle burned people alive. And it's really hard for me to tell my life story honestly without alienating most all of my cousins and making them all hate me, because only a handful of them will really recognize the truth about who our ancestors are, about who our people are, and about the things that we were doing right up until modern times, right up until the 1980s. And that one whole side of my family really lived a life that can be best described as an outlaw lifestyle. They lived on the fringe of society. And I believe I can genetically and also culturally trace our family history back to Irish travelers. And the story of how that whole side of my family got to this country is all tied up in the potato famine in Ireland, and so many other American Irish people stories. But our people were outlaws even in the old country, and that a lot of our methods of survival are considered criminal, but we used them for a long time to survive. And that's something that the current generation, my cousins, people my age and slightly older, don't like to talk about. But there is no denying, the roots that we came out of. And that child abuse and pedophilia is a part of our family history, and that many of us are victims. I was not victimized by family because they all knew and feared the old Marine. Many of my cousins underwent a lot of sexual molestation and rape and that sort of thing, repeated lifetime of it, in some cases going on until the girl got married and said, "Stop it, my husband doesn't like this anymore." That's how this kind of incestuous child abuse would go on and on. And I think that we've all finally broken the cycle. I was never a victim of that, but I've seen up close the outcome of that kind of behavior. And that's just part of it. That's just one little sick part of it. Really, that's the part nobody wants to talk about, is what was going on in the, behind closed doors. But if you just look at how, we publicly lived, and that conning people and ripping people off was kind of how that whole side of the family taught you to survive. And by the time the radio, the police car radio was invented, and by the time, photography and cameras and fingerprints and all that started to become used, then what ended up happening is some of my family members got pinched for the first time in family history, because they were very good at the criminal behavior. That many of them, if they were to find this channel, it's part of why I'm using my fake name. I just don't want to deal with my cousins who are in denial about who we really were and who our family was. And, right down to the fact that all of the grown children in the family would bring a patronage, an offering back to the grandparents of every deal they did. And that my dad in particular would get sucked in by his wife's side of the family into business deals and investments that would always end up with him broke and them driving a new car. And, they were like, "I don't know where the money went. We lost it. Stuff happens." And they would engineer these business failures so that they could strip the capital out of it and leave you holding the bag. But I think because of modern prosecution methods, a couple of us did some hard time on that side of the family, and we all straightened out. You can't live that way in modern times. It's too much video evidence and paper trails, and it's just harder to get away with things. To give you an example of kind of the stupid things, a couple of my cousins bought one of those septic pumping trucks. And they would go out to farms and, offer to pump their septic tanks out at half the going rate. It's because they didn't have to pay the waste disposal fee, because they would fill the truck up, drive out in the woods, pull the handle on the truck, and dump the crap in the woods. Dump the septic in the woods, and not have to pay the disposal fees and all of that. And so they were just making a killing. It was like free money. And I can remember going fishing with my evil grandfather. That's the main cousin lie about our past, is they want to make that grandpa look better than he was. But I know the truth about who he was, and what he did, and what he did to people in our family. But hey, I spent 1 week fishing on a lake with my grandpa, and at the end of the week we went to leave this beautiful, pristine state park, and they pulled out ahead of us with their RV, with their camper. And he just gets out, walks around, pulls the T-handle on his septic tank, his waste, his black water tank, and black poo and water starts pouring out the back, and he just hops in the car and drives away and leaves this trail of brown slime on the ground behind him as he leaves the state park. So these are the kind of people that we came from. And the net result of that kind of upbringing for some of my cousins was hard times. And probably my favorite person in the world, and the person I know has my back more than anybody else in our family, I won't name him, but I actually love this man dearly, and he is the closest thing I'll ever have to a brother. But he's got 32 felony convictions and spent most of his life in the state penitentiary. And he's he's been out for a good long while. He's all reformed, and he's doing a really good thing, I think. Now he's helping cancer patients by growing some of the best medical marijuana in the state. But the net result of that kind of lifestyle was prison for us and for him. He always had a temper, and he tended to go over the top instead of playing it safe. But I can tell you one thing: if anything ever happens to me, and if Antifa, if there's somebody out there stalking me and you're planning to do something to me, you better do something to him too, because if you do something to me and you don't get him too, he'll probably kill you. I'm just letting you know. Anybody that hurts me has to deal with my 32 felony count Irish mafia reformed cousin who will come after you. He will. My kid probably won't. I raised my kid to respect law and justice, and he'll seek justice and law. My cousin, he'll probably do something to you, and he'll probably get away with it. So I have this whole one side of my family who are very different than probably any of you could even imagine, unless you've known those kind of hillbilly grapes of wrath, mattress on top of the car kind of redneck Irish mafia grifters, then you don't know. And honestly, they don't exist so much anymore, because they get it's a reform or go to prison these days. But then on the other side of my family are these people that we thought we were Indians. They're all brown. Turns out that they're also gypsies, and that's where the brown color comes from, is from that Mediterranean, Indian subcontinent, Middle Eastern mix that many gypsies have. But they were living as Native Americans for generations. And so I have that whole side that's preachers and Marines and law and order. And, my mother, who came from that kind of criminal Irish background on the other side, when she married my father, the Native American Marine turned preacher, law and order guy, she had a conversion, and they were so young when they got married. She wasn't fully finished, being formed as a human being yet. They got married when they were 17. So after a few years with the old Marine, my mom became a real warrior for justice and fairness and righteousness. But there's still to this day this rebel side of my mother that is like, well, I guess it's only wrong if you get caught. Even after all those years of being a preacher. But for me, my raising was definitely from the perspective of the old Marine, and that he insulated me a lot from these other people. And there was only one family that I was really allowed to live around, because it was my mother's sister. and her husband, because my dad and her husband, my dad and his brother-in-law, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what relation they were. But at any rate, they were friends. And so that's my cousin that had the 32 felony counts, that has my back. He was the baby of that family. And so I was allowed to be around them, and I was around my cousins some, but I was not enough to ever be considered really one of them. I get honorable mention because I'm a blood relative and a member of that family like the rest of them, but I didn't share in their adventures like the rest of them did. And so it was a very interesting conundrum to have this clash of morality. This one side of the family that really didn't see a problem. In fact, it was family sport to get the best of other people. In fact, it's games that cousins play with each other that could get violent. It was literally one rule: you can't kill each other. You can beat each other up, but you can't kill each other. So there was a lot of screwing people and stabbing people in the back, and half of my cousins won't even talk to the other half because of all of the business deals gone bad. I was not around to see any of it because when I turned 17, I stuck my thumb out and I went to Texas. But growing up in this situation was very unusual, and I think that's why a lot of you are going to continue watching these videos to hear the unusual perspectives and stories of my crazy, strange life. I really always believed I was a half-breed Indian until I was DNA tested. See my video, I was a fake Indian, to find out that after my father passed away, I found out that me and him and our whole side of the family that we thought were Native Americans aren't. But the culture was. We borrowed the culture. I guess we culturally appropriated. And I identified as a white Indian growing up, and it got me into so many fights. That and the fact that I was always the effing new guy. I was always the new guy at every school. If you watch the previous videos, you know that we moved all the time. And that made for a very strong dynamic. So you have within me these two kind of at war. What does both sides of my family have in common? What does the Irish travelers and the Marine Corps preachers have in common? Well, if you mess with us, we're going to stump a mud hole in you. That's what we have in common, is our ability to fight back and our lack of hesitating. We do not hesitate to defend ourselves. And we all know how to fight. So I got the righteous learn how to fight from the Marine Corps side of my family, and then I got the sneak up behind you and hit you in the back of the head with a brick kind of fighting from my criminal outlaw family. And, we'll give you an example. I was always a bully buster. And when I went to a new school in La Grande, Oregon, up in the mountains, this was a very quiet and very isolated community. And the people there were all related. And they did not take well to people moving into town, new people coming to town. They were not used to people coming to town and moving there. And so when we moved there and started a church in 1979, I was not welcomed into the school. In fact, we had spent the summer up on the lake, and I'd had a romantic connection with another little girl my age, and we held hands and smooched all summer long while our families were camped out on this mountain lake. And at the end, we said goodbye and never thought we'd see each other again. And then she went her way and I went mine, but we moved into that town near that lake and started that church in the fall of 1979. And when I enrolled in school and went to my class, she was in my class and sat right next to me. But she pretended not to know me. She would not acknowledge or talk to me because of the pressure from her friends to hate me because I was not one of them. And so I did some serious fighting in this school. There was a guy, his name was Ch.3. Everyone called him Ch.3. And I can't remember what his name was, but I don't know if he had a Hispanic or Italian heritage. He was just another kid, but he was slightly brown. And he was kind of the rock star of the school. Everybody loved Chachi. Everybody loved Chach. And even the teachers all liked him. And his mom was active in the PTA. And, he was athletic. and he pretty much ruled the school. Nobody messed with him either out of idol worship of him or fear of his athleticism and the fact that he, had a reputation for fighting. And then he had him a couple of toadies. They always do. The bullies always have a couple of toadies. They have a couple of guys on their side that do whatever they tell them to do, and they're typically big. And he had one toady named Rod. And there was a lot of taunting, and there was a lot of threatening, and there was a lot of messing with me when I first got there. But it all kind of came to a head one day when I was playing basketball with a little kid I made. I always made friends with the geeks, the nerds, or the kids that were being bullied. My friends typically had pacemakers and neck braces, and walked with a they had some kind of deformity, or something that made them the target of bullying. I just tended to, they were the ones that would talk to me when I was the new guy. And so I was playing ball with one of these kind of puny boys that I'd befriended, and he missed the basket and the ball went off, and Ch.3 came to get the ball, and he picked it up, and I was like, "Hey, thanks, man, toss it to me." I had not really had any interactions with him, but I had butted heads with his toadies on more than one occasion, and poked my finger in their chest and told them I thought they didn't have the guts to back up their words. And so I think Ch.3 decided that this was his opportunity to deal with me. And so, he takes the ball, and he turns around, and with some athletic prowess that I was quite impressed by, he hurls my basketball that I was using over the school fence into the street. It rolls down the block, and it doesn't stop rolling until it's nearly to my house. You see, I lived about a block from the school, and I could see the church steeple I lived in the church basement, so I could see the church steeple from the school. Church, house in between. I lived in the basement of the church. So, anyway, when he did that, I just had enough of it, I guess. And I kind of charged him. I won't lie. I charged him. I came at him, and he and I started fighting. And we had us a little fist fight, at which point, after a few dodges and a couple of parries and a couple of jabs, I caught him right in the point of the chin, and I knocked him silly, and I knocked him down. And so I mounted him, and I started doing the ground and pound thing. People think that was invented recently. No, that's a schoolyard tactic from way back. It goes all the way back to the caveman. And so I was grounding and pounding this guy, and typically when I got him in that position, I would usually grab him by the hair and bounce their head off the ground a few times, and make them proclaim that they would no longer bully me and promise to leave me alone and apologize for being such a jerk, and basically tell them that let them make them say I'm superior, that I'm superior to them, that I will do this again to you if you don't leave me alone, that this is your new fate every day. I'm going to bash your head into the ground every time. And this is how I dealt with bullies. And I had him into that position when the lights went out. I caught motion to the right rear, and it was, next thing I know, I'm on my back, and he's up, and there's 4 guys, him and 4 guys. There's 5 guys encircling me, and they're just stomping me, old school Joe Pesci style. I mean, they're Goodfellow and me, if there was a curb around, they would have curb stomped me, and they were just kicking me, and I look over, and there's a teacher, and of course she's friends with Ch.3's mom, and she knows Ch.3 real well, and we've already had some disagreements with her toadies that she has sided with them against me, and she sees them kicking me, and she gives me one of these. She sees me, and then when I see her see me, she goes, like she doesn't see what's going on. And I pretty much lay there and get the crap kicked out of me till the bell rings, and she blows a whistle, and they all go running off, and she leaves and takes all of the kids and leaves me in the middle of the soccer field, beaten and bloodied. So I crawled on my hands and knees home. I had a sprained wrist, a sprained ankle. This eye was swollen completely shut. This one I could see a little bit out of. I didn't lose any teeth, but my lip was busted, and my tongue was chewed up. And mainly I had goose eggs on the top of my head from being kicked in the head repeatedly. bruised ribs. Nothing was broken. I went and got checked out by the doctor, but I crawled home, and the old Marine took me to the hospital and got me taken care of, and I missed a week of school while I recuperated. When I went back to school, on my very first day back, my aunt picked me up. My mom's sister picked me up at school, and with her was my cousin, the one who would go on and get 32 felony convictions on his record. He was in the car, and I guess he was older. He was in junior high, so he was about 14, and I guess I was about 11 years old. And I think this was 5th or 6th grade, 5th grade. Anyhow, he and her picked me up and from school, and we drive around the block, and then we pull back by the church. And instead of getting out, like I thought they were going to take me somewhere. I mean, that's why they picked me up. She pulls back around, and now we're parked in front of the church, but we can see the front of the school where all the kids are at. And my aunt, I gotta be so careful not to say names. My aunt starts giggling this weird kind of that side of my family Irish giggle, Irish mafia giggle, and she's like, okay, so which one was it? Which one was it that beat you up? Which one? There's any of those boys that beat you up like that? Are they out there out front? I mean, which one of them are they? Who are we talking about? How big are they? And I'm innocent. I think she's just curious. So there's one of the boys, the toady, Rod. And he's right there in the front, and we can see him. And we'll see that boy right there in the black jacket and the one with the Raiders cap, or the Steelers cap on. Yeah, that one right there. You sure that's the one? You sure that's the one? And she pulls up just a little bit to get her a little closer to where we're at. And she goes, you sure that's the boy? And I go, yeah, that's him. And she says, get him, to my cousin in the back seat. And like I said, he's 14. He's kind of man-sized. Got them big hard knuckles, you know. And he jumps out, and he just sprints straight at this boy. And he just leaps into the air, and he Superman punches him right in the side of the head. Sucker punches him so hard. Worse than Spencer got it from the Antifa. If you ever seen that footage when Richard Spencer got cold cocked by Antifa. This guy, my cousin Superman punches this guy right in the temple, and he just eats it. And then he proceeds to kick him about 7 or 8 times on the ground, and my aunt pulls the car right up to the curb where he's at and starts yelling, get in the car, get in the car, get in the car. He dives in the back window of the car like this, and she peels out running away going, mess with one of us. So that gives you an idea kind of how crazy my family was and what it was like to be this preacher's kid on the side of law and order, surrounded by these out there fringe of society kind of folks. And to see them all now in their old age and all normal and gentrified. I was gone for 30 years, and America and justice and the internet age tamed them all, along with some aging and some maturity, tamed them all. And as far as I know, the younger generation are getting day jobs and being normal. And this outlaw behavior seemed to kind of end somewhere in the 1980s or early 90s. And even my cherished cousin, his felony convictions were originally he went in for some theft related stuff. I'm not going to tell you his record, but most of those other convictions are for fighting law enforcement and fighting prison guards and fighting other inmates. And he was an enforcer in prison. If you were a pedo and you ended up in his prison, he was the guy that brought you to meet Jesus. He'd bring you right to the edge of death because they don't tolerate pedophiles in prison. And they usually get the crap beat out of them if they don't get just straight up killed. And he ended up even doing that to a family member who was a pedo who went in there on a child rape charge. And he almost killed his own cousin, to beat him into that prison deal. I'm not sure how all that works. I listen like this when I listen to his stories. And I will tell you, one time he caught a guy coming in his bedroom window. Yeah, he chopped his arm off with a samurai sword. That's for another story. And he didn't go to prison for that one. He got no-billed for that one. I don't know what they call it here. In Texas, they call it getting no-billed. They didn't charge him here. It was self-defense. But, yeah, don't mess with my family, and don't mess with me if you don't want to deal with them, because that's that side. And then there's the Marines, and they'll get you in their own special way too for messing with me. So I got good peeps. Maybe that's why I have the guts to come out here on this channel and say the things I do. But thank you for listening to my autobiography, The Perils of an Interesting Life, Chapter 3. See you next time.